Let me tell you something. When Twilight hit theaters back in 2008, nobody could have predicted it would become the cultural juggernaut it turned into. I mean, we're talking about a movie that literally changed the landscape of young adult fiction adaptations forever. So let's dive deep into this sparkling vampire romance and figure out what made it tick, what made it stumble, and why we're still talking about it over a decade later. The story kicks off in the perpetually rainy town of Forks, Washington, where our protagonist Bella Swan moves to live with her father Charlie. Now, Bella's not your typical teenager. She's introspective, clumsy, and kind of an outsider, which honestly made her relatable to millions of viewers who felt the same way. The premise is deceptively simple. Girl moves to new town. Girl meets mysterious boy. Mysterious boy turns out to be a vampire. But there's so much more layered underneath that basic setup. What really drives the narrative forward is the forbidden love aspect. Edward Cullen isn't just any vampire. He's a vampire who's desperately fighting against his nature because Bella's blood literally sings to him. It's like putting your favorite dessert right in front of someone on a diet and asking them not to eat it. Except in this case, eating the dessert means killing your girlfriend. The stakes are high, pun absolutely intended, and that tension permeates every scene they share together. The film explores themes of desire, restraint, and the struggle between what we want and what's good for us. Edward represents danger and excitement, everything that Bella's mundane life in Phoenix wasn't. There's also this underlying current of obsession that runs through the story, which, depending on your perspective, is either intensely romantic or slightly concerning. But hey, we're talking about vampires here, so normal relationship dynamics kind of go out the window. What makes the premise work, at least for its target audience, is how it taps into those universal feelings of first love. That all-consuming, world-stopping intensity that makes everything else fade into background noise. Whether you're Team Edward or not, you can't deny that the film captures that particular brand of teenage emotional intensity pretty effectively. The supernatural world-building introduces us to a mythology that diverges significantly from traditional vampire lore. These vampires don't burn in sunlight. They sparkle. They don't sleep in coffins or turn into bats. They're essentially superheroes with a dietary restriction, and this departure from established vampire rules made the Cullens more accessible as romantic leads. Edward can take Bella to prom without worrying about sunrise, which opens up storytelling possibilities that traditional vampire mythology would have constrained. Now let's talk about our main players in this supernatural drama. Bella Swan, portrayed by Kristen Stewart, is our entry point into this world of vampires and ancient treaties. She's written as an every-girl character, not particularly special on the surface, which is precisely what makes her appealing to readers and viewers who can project themselves into her shoes. Bella's character is defined by her relationships, particularly her all-consuming love for Edward, which has been both praised as romantic and criticized as codependent depending on who you ask. What's interesting about Bella is her observer quality. She's someone who spent her life on the periphery, taking care of her flighty mother Renee, being responsible beyond her years. Moving to Forks to live with Charlie represents both a sacrifice, leaving the sunny familiarity of Phoenix, and an escape from the caretaker role she's been trapped in. Of course, she ends up in another caretaker dynamic, just reversed, with Edward obsessively protecting her. Edward Cullen, brought to life by Robert Pattinson, is the brooding century-old vampire who's stuck in the body of a 17-year-old. He's got that whole tortured soul thing going on, complete with the ability to read minds. Everyone's minds except Bella's, which is what initially draws him to her. Edward's character is a study in contradictions. He's dangerous but protective, passionate but restrained, ancient but youthful. The fact that he's lived through the Spanish flu pandemic, the world wars, and decades of American history while frozen at 17 creates this interesting temporal displacement. He's deeply old-fashioned in his courtship of Bella, which reads as romantic to some and paternalistic to others. Then we have Jacob Black, played by Taylor Lautner, who in this first installment is just Bella's childhood friend and the son of Charlie's best friend Billy. He's warm, sunny, and represents the normal life Bella could have if she just stayed away from the Cullens. Jacob's role here is relatively small, serving mainly as a connection to the Quileute tribe and their legends about the Cold Ones. His character delivers crucial exposition about the Cullen family's true nature through the beach conversation, where he shares tribal stories he doesn't yet know are true. Charlie Swan, Bella's father, is played by Billy Burke, and he's honestly one of the most grounding elements of the entire film. He's just a regular dad trying to connect with his teenage daughter he hasn't lived with for years, completely oblivious to the supernatural chaos swirling around her. His awkward attempts at parenting provide some much-needed levity in a film that can take itself pretty seriously at times. The scenes where Charlie tries to have the talk with Bella, or where he comments favorably on Edward not knowing he's a vampire, show Burke's perfect comedic timing and genuine paternal warmth. The Cullen family rounds out our main cast. Dr. Carlisle Cullen, played by Peter Fasinelli, serves as the compassionate patriarch who chose to turn his nature toward healing rather than destruction. His backstory, as the son of an Anglican pastor in 1600s London who turned himself into a vampire hunting vampires, gives him a moral foundation that he's passed down to his created family. Carlisle represents the possibility of redemption and choice overcoming nature. Esme Cullen, portrayed by Elizabeth Reeser, provides the maternal warmth that makes the Cullen house feel like a home. Her own tragic backstory, attempting suicide after losing a child and being turned by Carlisle in the 1920s, adds depth to her immediate affection for Bella and her protective instincts toward the entire family. Alice Cullen, brought to vibrant life by Ashley Greene, became an instant fan favorite. Alice's precognitive abilities make her uniquely positioned to be Bella's bridge into the vampire world. She's already seen Bella as part of their family, so she treats her as such from the beginning. Her bubbly, enthusiastic personality contrasts sharply with the brooding tone of the rest of the family and her mysterious past. She was turned in an asylum with no memory of her human life, adds intrigue that the film only hints at. Jasper Hale, played by Jackson Rathbone, is the newest vegetarian vampire in the family, having only recently joined the Cullen lifestyle after spending decades in vampire wars in the South. His constant discomfort around Bella stems from his weaker control, and Rathbone plays this tension with an almost painful intensity. His ability to manipulate emotions adds another layer to the family's supernatural capabilities. Rosalie Hale, portrayed by Nikki Reed, is the only family member openly hostile to Bella's presence. Her stunning beauty and obvious resentment create immediate conflict, but the film only hints at her motivations, her own tragic human death and transformation in the 1930s, and her resentment that Bella would choose to give up humanity when Rosalie would give anything to have that choice back. Edward Cullen, played by Kellen Lutz, brings levity and physical comedy to the family dynamic. His teddy bear personality and obvious enjoyment of his vampire strength, he's the one who most enthusiastically participates in the baseball game, makes him immediately likable. His relationship with Rosalie shows a softer side to her character. Robert Pattinson's journey with this role is fascinating because he's been refreshingly open about his complicated relationship with the character. During filming, he was a relatively unknown British actor, best known for his role as Cedric Diggory in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and he suddenly found himself at the center of a massive franchise. His portrayal of Edward is all intense stares and measured movements, playing Edward as someone who's constantly fighting an internal battle between desire and restraint. What's interesting is how Pattinson brought his own interpretation to Edward, sometimes pushing against what he felt were the character's more problematic aspects. He's discussed in interviews how he tried to play certain scenes with an awareness that Edward's behavior, the stalking, the controlling tendencies, might actually be creepy, rather than purely romantic. This self-awareness adds layers of complexity that might not have been explicitly in the script but come through in his performance. The physicality Pattinson brought to Edward is particularly noteworthy. He moves with this deliberate stillness, almost statue-like, which creates an otherworldly quality that reminds us he's not human. The way he holds himself apart, the careful control in every gesture, the way his hands hover near Bella but don't quite touch, all of this communicates centuries of practiced restraint. In scenes where that control slips, like when he saves Bella from the van or when he first smells her in biology class, the contrast is stark and effective. Pattinson had to balance being attractive enough to justify Bella's instant obsession while also seeming just alien enough to remind us he's a predator. It's a tightrope walk, and while it doesn't always work perfectly, some of his line deliveries are unintentionally funny, there are moments where he absolutely nails the duality of Edward's nature. The meadow scene, where he reveals his sparkling skin and talks about being a killer, shows Pattinson at his best, conveying both the wonder and the danger of Edward's existence. His vocal choices are interesting too. The slight formality in his speech patterns, the way he sometimes sounds like he's from another era, reminds us that Edward has lived for over a century. When he quotes Romeo and Juliet or references classical music, it doesn't feel pretentious because Pattinson plays it as natural for someone of Edward's actual age and education. Kristen Stewart's involvement in Twilight was a calculated risk for her career. She was already an established actress with indie credibility from films like Into the Wild and Panic Room, and taking on a role in what was essentially a teen romance film could have been seen as a step backward. But Stewart brought something essential to Bella, a naturalistic acting style that grounded the more fantastical elements of the story. Her Bella isn't a polished, movie-perfect teenager. She's genuinely awkward, she stammers. She's physically clumsy in ways that seem authentic rather than cutesy. Stewart's understated performance actually serves the character well. Bella in the books is written as somewhat blank, a cipher for readers to project onto, and Stewart's approach maintains that quality while still giving Bella a distinct personality. The criticism Stewart received for her limited range of expressions and trademark lip-biting actually misses what she's doing with the character. Bella is someone who spent her life being overlooked, making herself small, taking care of others rather than demanding attention. Stewart plays her as someone constantly overwhelmed by the intensity of her own emotions, trying to process feelings too big to express. The looking down, the stammering, the physical awkwardness, these are all consistent character choices showing Bella's discomfort with being the center of attention. What Stewart excels at is conveying Bella's internal experience through micro-expressions and physical presence. When Edward is near, her entire focus shifts to him. The way she angles her body toward him, the way her breathing changes, the way everything else fades from her awareness. It's not always comfortable to watch because it's so intense, but it's truthful to the character's obsessive love. Stewart also brings vulnerability to Bella that makes her sympathetic despite some of her more questionable choices. When she's frightened in the ballet studio, when she's heartbroken by Edward's initial coldness, when she's overwhelmed by meeting his family, Stewart doesn't try to make Bella braver or more confident than she is. She lets Bella be genuinely scared and uncertain, which makes her determination to be part of Edward's world despite those fears more meaningful. The chemistry between Stewart and Pattinson became legendary both on screen and off, and their real-life romance, which developed during filming, added an authenticity to their interactions that you honestly can't manufacture. When Edward looks at Bella like she's the only person in the world, when Bella can't focus on anything else when Edward is near, there's a genuineness to their connection that transcends the sometimes clunky dialogue they're given. What they do really well together is create a sense of mutual obsession that feels dangerous and addictive. This isn't a balanced, healthy relationship, and they don't play it as one. They play it as two people who are dangerously fixated on each other, which is actually what the story requires. The way Edward watches Bella with this barely contained intensity, the way Bella literally cannot look away from him, it creates this bubble around them where nothing else exists. The physical chemistry is crucial for a romance this intense. The film is very much about desire and restraint. Edward wants Bella, but can't have her without risking killing her. Pattinson and Stewart play this tension beautifully, with every touch charged with significance. The scene in Edward's room, where he's holding her while she sleeps, demonstrates this perfectly. There's tenderness, but also this coiled tension, the constant awareness of danger. Their comfort with each other allows for intimate moments that feel genuine rather than staged. The meadow scene, where they're lying together and Bella traces Edward's face, has a natural quality to it. The way they move around each other, the easy physical proximity mixed with electric awareness, it sells the idea that these two people are magnetically drawn together, despite all reason. Catherine Hardwicke took the director's chair for Twilight, and her vision really shaped what the franchise would become. Hardwicke was known for her indie sensibilities, having directed films like 13 and Lords of Dogtown, which brought a grittier, more realistic approach to teenage stories. She wasn't the obvious choice for a supernatural romance, and that's precisely what made her interesting for the project. Hardwicke approached Twilight with the intensity of a serious indie drama rather than a fluffy teen romance. She wanted to capture the obsessive, almost dangerous quality of first love, and she pushed her actors to explore the darker undertones of the story. Her direction emphasized the physical tension between Edward and Bella, making their scenes together feel charged and slightly uncomfortable, which actually serves the story's themes of forbidden desire. What Hardwicke brought to the table was a distinctly female perspective on this romance. She understood the fantasy from the inside, the appeal of the dangerous but devoted boyfriend, the escape from mundane reality, the intoxication of being someone's entire world. But she also wasn't afraid to show the problematic aspects, like Edward's controlling behavior and his breaking into Bella's room to watch her sleep. She lets these moments play as romantic within the fantasy context while not entirely hiding their creepiness. Her visual style for the film leaned heavily into the Pacific Northwest setting, using the constant rain and overcast skies to create this moody, atmospheric backdrop for the romance. Hardwicke wanted Forks to feel almost like another character in the film, oppressive, isolated, and slightly magical. She succeeded in creating a specific visual language for Twilight that the subsequent films tried to replicate with varying degrees of success. Hardwicke's use of handheld camera in intimate scenes creates immediacy and slight instability that matches Bella's emotional state. The camera often feels like it's intruding on private moments, getting uncomfortably close to the actors' faces during emotional scenes. This voyeuristic quality actually works for a story about obsessive love and invasion of privacy. Edward literally spies on Bella, and the camera mimics that intrusive watching. She also made interesting choices about when to slow down and when to speed up. The film takes its time with relationship moments, the biology class introduction, the forest conversation where Bella confronts Edward, the meadow scene, allowing these to breathe and develop naturally. But action sequences, when they come, are frenetic and almost chaotic, with quick cuts and close-ups that create disorientation. Unfortunately, Hardwicke was replaced for the sequel, New Moon, due to the compressed production schedule Summit Entertainment demanded and reported conflicts over budget and creative direction. She's been open about her disappointment with that decision, feeling she deserved the opportunity to continue the story she'd started. Her departure changed the franchise's trajectory significantly, with each subsequent director bringing their own vision. But that first film bears her unique stamp in ways the sequels don't quite match. The screenplay for Twilight was adapted by Melissa Rosenberg, who had the unenviable task of condensing Stephen E. Meyer's 498-page novel into a screenplay that would work as a 2-hour film. Rosenberg, whose background included television work on shows like Dexter, had to make tough choices about what to keep and what to cut, trying to preserve the essence of what made the book popular while making it work cinematically. Rosenberg's approach was to preserve the internal monologue that defines Bella's character in the books and externalize it through dialogue and visual storytelling. This is harder than it sounds. So much of the book's appeal comes from being inside Bella's head, experiencing her obsessive thoughts about Edward. Rosenberg had to find ways to communicate those feelings without constant voice-over narration, which meant the other characters had to speak Bella's thoughts aloud, or the visuals had to convey them. She kept certain scenes almost verbatim from Meyer's novel because they were too iconic to change. The meadow scene, the biology class first meeting, the say it out loud moment where Bella confronts Edward about being a vampire, these are lifted almost directly from Meyer's prose because fans would have rioted if they weren't. The challenge was making dialogue that works on the page sound natural when spoken aloud, and this is where the screenplay sometimes struggles. One of Rosenberg's biggest challenges was the lack of traditional action in the first book until the very end. The story is mostly about Bella and Edward's relationship development, their conversations, their growing obsession with each other. This is great for a book, but can be static on screen. She had to find ways to create visual interest and momentum in scenes that are essentially just two people talking. The addition of certain scenes, like the extended baseball sequence, helped break up the relationship-heavy narrative with action beats. The baseball game serves multiple purposes. It showcases the Cullens' abilities, provides a family bonding moment, and introduces the nomadic vampires who drive the climax. It's efficient storytelling that addresses the film's need for visual spectacle. The dialogue in Twilight has become legendary, both for its romantic quotability and its unintentional comedy. Lines like, "You're my own personal brand of heroine. I'm gonna fight for you until your heart stops beating," and "Hold on tight, Spider Monkey," are either swoon-worthy or laughable depending on your perspective. Rosenberg was working with some pretty purple prose from the source material, and translating that to screen dialogue that actors have to say out loud with straight faces was challenging. What Rosenberg did manage to do was preserve the emotional core of the story. The script might be clunky in places, and some of the dialogue might make you cringe, but the fundamental appeal, this dangerous, all-consuming love between two people who shouldn't be together, comes through clearly. She understood that for the film to work, audiences needed to believe in Edward and Bella's connection, and she structured the screenplay to build that relationship methodically. The exposition about vampire mythology is handled through multiple characters. Jacob tells the tribal legends, Edward explains his family's history, various Cullens demonstrate their abilities. This distributed approach to world building prevents any single scene from becoming a pure info dump, though some moments still feel heavy with necessary explanation. Rosenberg also made the smart choice to give the supporting characters at Bella's school distinct personalities, even with limited screen time. Jessica, Mike Newton, Angela, Eric, they're not deeply developed, but they're distinct enough to make Bella's social world feel populated and real. Their reactions to Bella and the Cullens help establish the social dynamics of Forks High School, the creation story of Twilight. The film is almost as dramatic as the story within it. Summit Entertainment acquired the film rights to Meyer's novel in 2004, optioning the book before it was even published based on the manuscript and the buzz it was generating in publishing circles. This was a risky move. Young adult fiction adaptations didn't have the proven track record they do now, and vampire stories were considered fairly niche at the time. Initial development was slow, with various scripts and directors being considered. At one point, the project was being developed with a much larger budget and a more action-oriented approach. But Stephenie Meyer pushed back forcefully, insisting that the love story needed to be the center of the film, not vampire action sequences. The decision to scale back the budget to a modest $37 million and focus on the romance rather than spectacle was actually what saved the project and made it profitable. Catherine Hardwicke came on board in 2007, about a year before the film's release, and she immediately started intensive work with the actors to develop their characters. She had Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson spend significant time together before filming officially began, building their relationship so the chemistry would feel natural and lived in on screen. Hardwicke also took them to the actual locations in Washington where the film would be set, immersing them in the atmosphere of the Pacific Northwest. The casting process was intense and highly publicized, with fan campaigns for various actors and actresses flooding the internet before Hardwicke was even attached. When Robert Pattinson was cast as Edward, there was actually significant backlash from some book fans who had different visions of the character. Many felt he wasn't handsome enough or didn't match their mental image. The studio was nervous about the fan reaction and even considered recasting, but Stephenie Meyer's vocal endorsement helped smooth things over. She fought for Pattinson after seeing his chemistry rid with Kristen Stewart, insisting he embodied Edward's character. Kristen Stewart was cast relatively early in the process. Hardwicke saw her naturalistic acting style as perfect for grounding the fantastical elements of the story. Stewart's ability to convey internal emotion without being overly expressive matched Hardwicke's vision for Bella as someone experiencing overwhelming feelings she doesn't quite know how to process. Taylor Lautner's casting as Jacob Black was less controversial at the time, though he almost didn't return for New Moon because the character description in the later books, significantly larger and more muscular, didn't match his build. He famously underwent an intensive training program, gaining 30 pounds of muscle to keep the role. But in this first film, he's just a friendly, lanky teenager. The Cullen family casting was crucial to making the vampire mythology believable. Peter Fasinelli, Elizabeth Reeser, Ashley Greene, Nikki Reed, Kellen Lutz, and Jackson Rathbone had to function as a convincing family unit despite being relative strangers. Hardwicke had them spend time together off-set, developing their family dynamic and creating backstories for their relationships that went beyond what was in the script. Production itself took place over about 3 months in early 2008, with filming locations in Oregon and Washington. The compressed schedule created challenges. Some of the special effects looked rushed because they were, and certain scenes had to be simplified for time and budget constraints. The iconic Cullen house is actually a real residence in Portland, Oregon, called the Hoke House, which the production dressed but didn't significantly alter. The baseball scene was filmed on the Columbia River Gorge, with the actors actually learning to play in the super-speed style the scene required. The wire work and special effects for their supernatural abilities were added in post-production, but the actors performed the actual catching and hitting, which gives the scene a physicality that pure CGI wouldn't have achieved. The ballet studio sequence at the end was shot in a real dance studio, with the fight choreography designed to feel brutal and desperate rather than graceful. Pattinson and Stewart did many of their own stunts. Those stunt doubles were used for the more dangerous moments. The wire work for Edward throwing Bella across the room and James slamming into mirrors was complex for the film's budget, and the results are somewhat mixed in quality. Wyke Godfrey and Greg Moradian produced through Temple Hill Entertainment, managing the practical aspects while also protecting Hardwick's creative vision. Karen Rosenfeld's experience helped navigate the increasingly intense fan interest as production progressed. Fans were tracking filming locations, trying to sneak onto sets, and analyzing every leaked photo. The production team had to implement security measures to keep locations secret and prevent spoilers. Stephenie Meyer's role as producer gave her significant input into adaptation choices. She visited the set multiple times, consulted on key decisions, and even makes a cameo appearance in the film as a diner customer. Her presence ensured faithfulness to the books, but also meant some of the source material's weaknesses were preserved rather than addressed. Billy Burke's Charlie Swan deserves special recognition because he grounds the entire film in recognizable human reality. Burke plays Charlie with this perfect blend of awkward dad energy and genuine warmth that makes every scene he's in feel more authentic. His delivery of lines about having the talk with Bella, his oblivious enthusiasm about Edward being a nice guy, his obvious discomfort with emotional expression, all of this creates a fully realized character despite limited screen time. Charlie represents the normal world Bella is leaving behind, and Burke makes us understand what she's sacrificing. His love for his daughter is evident even when he doesn't know how to express it. The scenes where he's trying to connect with Bella, making her favorite dinner, asking about her day, giving her space while clearly wanting more, show a single father doing his best with a teenage daughter he hasn't lived with for years. Taylor Lautner, in his limited role here, plays Jacob as the anti-Edward in every way. Where Edward is cold and marble-like, Jacob is warm and approachable. Where Edward is mysterious and withholds information, Jacob is open and friendly. Lautner brings genuine likability to Jacob that makes you understand why Bella values his friendship, even as she's falling for Edward. The beach scene where he tells her the Quileute legends shows Lautner's natural charisma. He's not trying to be mysterious or seductive, just sharing cool stories with a friend. The performance is particularly impressive, knowing that Lautner almost lost the role for the sequels. His commitment to transforming himself physically to match Jacob's later character description demonstrate dedication that goes beyond this first film. But here, he establishes Jacob as a safe harbor, a connection to Bella's human life, and the possibility of normalcy. Ashley Greene's Alice Cullen brings energy and light to scenes that could otherwise feel oppressively serious. Greene plays Alice with effervescent enthusiasm that makes her instantly likable. Her precognitive visions give her unique knowledge. She's already seen Bella as part of their family, so she treats Bella with immediate affection and acceptance that bypasses the wariness the other Cullens show. The way Greene physicalizes Alice's otherworldliness is subtle but effective. She moves with a bouncing, almost floating quality that suggests both her pixie-like appearance and her supernatural nature. Her excitement about planning parties and playing dress-up with Bella provides levity and shows that being a vampire doesn't mean losing all joy in existence. Nikki Reed's Rosalie is the only Cullen who's openly hostile to Bella, and Reed has to make this antagonism understandable rather than just bitchy. She plays Rosalie with icy beauty and barely contained resentment, giving us glimpses of the pain underneath the hostility. When Rosalie glares at Bella during the family introduction, there's genuine anger there, not just cattiness. The film doesn't fully explain Rosalie's motivations, her own tragic transformation, and her resentment that Bella would choose to give up humanity. But Reed's performance suggests depths that make you want to know more. Jackson Rathbone's Jasper is fascinating because he's playing constant discomfort and barely maintained control. Rathbone makes Jasper seem genuinely pained by Bella's presence, struggling against his thirst in ways the other Cullens aren't. This sets up his later loss of control while also establishing him as the newest to the vegetarian lifestyle. The combination of his Confederate military background, which is problematic but part of the character, and his empathic abilities creates an interesting tension that Rathbone conveys through rigid posture and pained expressions. Kellen Lutz's Emmett provides much-needed humor and warmth. Lutz plays Emmett as someone who genuinely enjoys being a vampire, who has fun with his strength and speed rather than angsting about it. His enthusiasm during the baseball game, his teasing of his siblings, his obvious affection for Rosalie, all of this makes Emmett the most straightforwardly happy member of the family. Lutz brings a physicality to the role that makes Emmett feel powerful, but not threatening. Peter Fasinelli's Carlyle walks a difficult line between authority figure and compassionate healer. Fasinelli plays him with warmth and dignity, making Carlyle's choice to use his vampire nature for healing rather than destruction feel deeply rooted in character rather than plot convenience. His scenes with Bella, particularly when he's treating her injuries, show a gentleness and medical professionalism that makes his improbable career as a small-town doctor more believable. Elizabeth Reeser's Esme gets less screen time than she deserves, but she makes the most of it. Reeser plays Esme with such maternal warmth that you immediately understand why this family functions as a unit. Her welcoming of Bella into their home, her obvious love for Carlyle and her children, her gentle diffusing of tensions. Esme is the emotional glue holding the Cullens together, and Reeser conveys this with subtle gestures and expressions. The nomadic vampires, James, Victoria, and Laurent, bring a different energy entirely. Cam Gigandet plays James with predatory focus, making him genuinely threatening in ways the Cullens aren't. His obsession with hunting Bella isn't personal initially. She's just the most interesting challenge he's encountered in a long time. Gigandet gives James this casual cruelty that makes him frightening. He enjoys the hunt, enjoys toying with his prey, and feels no guilt about it. Rachelle Lefebvre's Victoria appears only briefly, but makes an impression with her wild, feral quality. Lefebvre plays Victoria as untamed and dangerous, someone who's fully embraced her predatory nature. Her relationship with James is established through small touches and glances, setting up her motivation for revenge in later films. Eddie Gathegi's Laurent is the most civilized of the nomadic trio, showing curiosity about the Cullens' lifestyle rather than dismissing it. Gathegi plays Laurent as thoughtful and observant, someone who might actually be considering trying their way of life. This makes his later choices in New Moon more impactful. He considered the alternative, but chose differently. The story of Twilight unfolds in three distinct acts that build from mundane teenage drama to supernatural thriller. The first act establishes Bella's move to Forks, her integration into the high school social scene, and her first encounters with Edward. This section moves deliberately, taking time to establish the setting and characters before introducing the supernatural elements. Bella's arrival in Forks is presented as a self-sacrifice. She's moving to this rainy, isolated town so her mother Renee can travel with her new husband Phil, a minor league baseball player. This immediately establishes Bella's caretaker tendencies and her habit of putting others' needs before her own. The gray, oppressive atmosphere of Forks contrasts sharply with the sunny Arizona she's leaving behind, creating visual metaphor for Bella's emotional state. Her first day at Forks High School introduces the supporting cast of human teenagers who will gradually fade from importance as she gets drawn into the vampire world. Jessica Stanley, who provides exposition about the school's social landscape. Mike Newton, who has an obvious crush on Bella, Angela Weber, who becomes her closest human friend, and Eric Yorkie, who awkwardly flirts with her. These characters populate Bella's human life and give her a normal teenage existence that will soon be upended. The cafeteria introduction to the Cullens is iconic for good reason. The way they're presented, ethereally beautiful, isolated from the other students, moving with unusual grace, immediately marks them as different. The film uses slow motion and careful framing to make them seem otherworldly before we know what they are. Bella's reaction, her immediate fascination, sets up her character arc. She's drawn to the different, the dangerous, the escape from normalcy. The biology class first meeting between Bella and Edward is charged with tension that goes beyond typical romantic attraction. Edward's reaction to her scent, holding his breath, gripping the table, looking at her with barely contained violence, introduces danger into what could have been a standard meet cute. His subsequent disappearance for a week, then his return with an apology and sudden friendliness, creates mystery that drives Bella to investigate. The second act focuses on Bella's discovery of Edward's true nature and their growing relationship. The van incident, where Edward saves Bella using superhuman strength and speed, gives her concrete evidence that something is wrong. His impossibly quick arrival, his ability to stop a van with his bare hands, his desperate attempts to convince her she imagined it, all of this confirms for Bella that Edward is hiding something significant. Her research into local legends, facilitated by Jacob's retelling of the Quileute Cold One story, leads to her realization that Edward is a vampire. The beach conversation with Jacob is crucial exposition delivered in a natural way. He's just sharing tribal stories he finds interesting, not realizing he's giving Bella the answer she's looking for. Taylor Lautner plays this scene with such genuine friendliness that Jacob's later betrayal of tribal secrets feels unintentional rather than calculated. The forest confrontation where Bella asks Edward directly about being a vampire is one of the film's strongest scenes. The "say it out loud" exchange has become memed to death, but in context, it's genuinely tense. Edward is giving Bella the opportunity to run, to reject him once she knows the truth, and she chooses to stay. Her whispered vampire is both accusation and acceptance, acknowledging the truth while committing to the relationship anyway. The meadow scene, where Edward reveals his sparkling skin in sunlight, is the film's most visually controversial moment. The sparkling effect has been mocked endlessly, and yes, it looks somewhat ridiculous. But the scene itself, Edward showing Bella his true nature, explaining that he's a killer, testing whether she'll still want him knowing what he is, works emotionally, even if the visual execution is questionable. It's the culmination of the first half's tension, Edward finally dropping all pretense and Bella choosing him anyway. Edward's integration of Bella into his family life marks a significant commitment, bringing her to meet the Cullens, introducing her as his girlfriend, asking them to accept her into their secret world. These are irrevocable steps that endanger both Bella and the family's carefully maintained secrecy. The family's varied reactions create interpersonal drama beyond just the central romance. The baseball scene serves as the turning point between relationship development and external plot. It's a moment of joy and family bonding, showing the Cullens at play, demonstrating their abilities in a light-hearted context. The choice to play during thunderstorms so the sound of their super-powered hits won't be noticed is clever world-building. The scene also showcases each family member's personality: Emmett's enthusiasm, Alice's grace, Rosalie's competitive edge. The arrival of the nomadic vampires, James, Victoria, and Laurent, during the baseball game introduces the external threat that will drive the third act. James catching Bella's scent and immediately fixating on her as prey transforms the story from romance to thriller. His predatory interest isn't personal. She's simply the most interesting challenge he's encountered, made more appealing because Edward is protecting her. The third act becomes a cat-and-mouse chase as the Cullens try to protect Bella from James's hunt. The plan to split up, some Cullens taking Bella to Phoenix, while others stay to track the nomadic vampires, makes strategic sense but separates our central couple at a crucial moment. The Phoenix setting, returning Bella to her home territory, should feel safe, but becomes the site of maximum danger. James's manipulation of Bella through faked footage of her mother demonstrates his intelligence and cruelty. He's not just physically dangerous, he understands human psychology well enough to exploit Bella's protective instincts toward Renee. Bella's decision to meet him alone, believing she's protecting her mother, shows both her courage and her tendency toward self-sacrificial stupidity. The ballet studio confrontation brings the film to its violent climax. The setting, Bella's childhood dance studio, adds emotional weight, corrupting a place of innocent memories with violence and trauma. James's taunting of Bella, his casual cruelty as he explains how he lured her, his filming of her impending death to torment Edward, all of this establishes him as genuinely evil rather than just a hungry vampire. The Cullens' arrival and the fight that follows is shot with frantic energy, quick cuts and close-ups that create chaos and urgency. Edward's desperation to save Bella, his vicious destruction of James, shows the violence he's capable of when protecting someone he loves. The other Cullens' participation, Emmett and Jasper dismembering James, Alice and Esme burning the pieces, demonstrates the brutality necessary to truly kill a vampire. But the real tension comes after, when Edward has to suck the venom from Bella's wound without draining her completely. This is the ultimate test of his control. He has to taste her blood, the thing he's desired most throughout the film, while stopping himself from killing her. It's both literal life-saving and metaphorical consummation, Edward finally tasting what he's craved while proving his love is stronger than his thirst. The hospital aftermath shows the consequences and cover-up necessary to maintain the vampire secret. Bella's injuries are explained as a fall downstairs and through a window, a story both Charlie and Renee accept, because the alternative is unthinkable. Edward's presence at her bedside, his visible anguish over her near death, demonstrates the emotional cost of their relationship. The prom ending provides romantic closure while setting up ongoing conflict. Edward taking Bella to prom despite her protests, their dance in the gazebo, the romantic atmosphere, all of this rewards the audience with the happy ending they've been waiting for. But Bella's request to be turned into a vampire and Edward's refusal introduces the central conflict that will drive the sequels. Victoria, watching from the woods, grieving James and plotting revenge, provides the hook for New Moon. The threat isn't over. In fact, it's intensified. Bella's involvement in the vampire world has made her a target beyond just Edward's presence in her life. The consequences of this love story extend far beyond the two of them. The visual aesthetic of Twilight is one of its most distinctive and divisive elements. Director of photography Elliot Davis, working closely with Catherine Hardwicke, created a look that's become synonymous with the franchise. Heavily desaturated colors, blue-gray tones, and an almost oppressive atmosphere that matches the Pacific Northwest setting. The color grading drains warmth from almost every scene set in Forks. The constant rain, overcast skies, and muted palette create a melancholy atmosphere that reflects Bella's emotional state. She's moving from sunny Phoenix to gray Forks, from warmth to cold, and the visual design emphasizes this contrast. The few moments of warm color, flashbacks to Phoenix, Bella's bedroom with its warm wood tones, the Cullen house's rich interiors, stand out precisely because they're so rare. This desaturated look became so associated with Twilight that it spawned countless parodies and even influenced other films trying to capture similar audiences. The blue filter became shorthand for a certain type of moody teen romance, for better or worse. While the aesthetic works for creating atmosphere, it can also feel oppressive over the film's 2-hour runtime, making even potentially bright scenes feel dingy. Hardwicke's camera work is intimate and sometimes uncomfortably close, particularly in scenes between Bella and Edward. The use of handheld camera creates instability and immediacy, making romantic scenes feel like you're intruding on private moments. The camera often pushes in close to the actors' faces, capturing micro-expressions and creating intensity through proximity. The film uses slow motion extensively for key romantic moments. Edward and Bella's first meeting in biology class, Edward saving Bella from the van, their first kiss, all are given weight and significance through slow motion photography. This technique emphasizes the emotional importance of these moments while also creating a dreamlike quality, suggesting Bella's heightened perception when Edward is near. The visual effects in Twilight are where the limited budget most obviously shows. The sparkling effect when Edward goes into sunlight has become one of the most mocked aspects of the film, and honestly, it does look pretty silly. The CGI has a video game quality that hasn't aged well, taking viewers out of the moment rather than enhancing the magic. The super speed effects are similarly inconsistent. Sometimes they're effective, like when Edward appears suddenly next to Bella, or when the Cullens move during the baseball game. Other times, they look cartoonish, particularly in the tree-climbing sequence where Edward carries Bella up a tree at supernatural speed. The wirework is visible, the green screen is obvious, and the whole sequence feels more awkward than romantic. The practical effects and makeup work better than the CGI. The vampire's pale skin, golden or red eyes, and the subtle wrongness of their beauty are effectively achieved through makeup and contact lenses. The Cullens look beautiful, but slightly off, not quite human, which sells their otherworldly nature better than any special effect could. The fight choreography in the ballet studio confrontation is functional, but not exceptional. The quick cuts and close-ups hide some of the limitations while creating a sense of chaos and violence. James throwing Bella across the room, Edward slamming into him, the brutality of dismemberment. These are shot to emphasize impact rather than grace, making a vampire combat feel savage rather than elegant. The cinematography creates beautiful images despite the muted color palette. The meadow scene, with sunlight filtering through trees and Edward sparkling in the light, is visually striking. The forest scenes throughout the film capture the brooding, mysterious quality of the Pacific Northwest, with towering trees, mist, and filtered light. Creating an ethereal atmosphere, lighting plays a crucial role in establishing mood and character. Edward is often partially lit, kept in shadows that emphasize his mysterious nature and his otherness. The side lighting and backlighting create a halo effect that makes the vampires seem luminous, set apart from normal humans even before we know what they are. The Cullen house is a masterpiece of production design. The real-world Hoke house, with its glass walls and modern architecture, creates a perfect vampire dwelling, transparent yet private, beautiful yet cold, modern yet timeless. The interior design emphasizes whites and grays, natural materials like wood and stone, creating a space that feels both welcoming and alien. The use of the house's architecture in framing shots is particularly effective. The glass walls allow for layered compositions with characters visible through multiple rooms, creating depth and visual interest. The openness of the space contrasts with the Cullen's secrecy, creating tension between what's visible and what's hidden. Bella's house, by contrast, is all warm wood tones and cozy clutter. It's lived in and comfortable, very human in its imperfection. The contrast between Bella's human home and the Cullen's vampire perfection is stark, showing visually the different worlds she's navigating. The high school is shot to emphasize its institutional dreariness. Harsh fluorescent lighting, crowded hallways, cramped classrooms, all of this makes Forks High School feel oppressive and uncomfortable. It's a prison of normalcy that Bella is desperate to escape, and the visual treatment reinforces this feeling. The forest becomes a liminal space between human and vampire worlds. It's where Edward takes Bella to show his true nature, where they can be together away from prying eyes, where normal rules don't apply. The towering trees, the filtered light, the sense of being watched. The forest is presented as both beautiful and dangerous, romantic and threatening. The meadow specifically is shot to feel like a fairy tale location. The circular clearing surrounded by trees, the way light falls in shafts through the canopy, the flowers and grass. It's consciously positioned as an enchanted space where transformation happens. Bella's acceptance of Edward's vampire nature occurs here, making it the site of her symbolic death to her normal life. Carter Burwell's score for Twilight creates much of the film's emotional atmosphere. Burwell, known for his work with the Coen brothers, brings a classical sensibility to the supernatural romance. His main theme, Bella's Lullaby, which Edward plays for Bella on piano, became one of the most recognizable elements of the franchise. The lullaby itself is simple and beautiful, a gentle piano melody that captures the tenderness of Edward and Bella's relationship. Robert Pattinson actually plays piano in the scene, though the more complex portions were performed by Burwell. The composition has a classical quality that fits Edward's old-fashioned nature while remaining accessible and romantic. Burwell's score throughout the film balances romance and danger. The strings swell during emotional moments between Bella and Edward, creating that swooning, overwhelmed feeling of first love. But there are also darker, more ominous musical moments when danger threatens, particularly during the James Hunt sequence. The sound design emphasizes the supernatural abilities of vampires in subtle ways. The slight echo or resonance to vampire voices, the sound of their movements, which are faster and more fluid than human motion, the impact when they collide. All of this creates an audio texture that marks them as different without being overtly supernatural. The soundtrack, as distinct from the score, became a phenomenon in its own right. Music supervisor Alexandra Patsavas assembled an indie-heavy collection that introduced mainstream audiences to alternative artists. The soundtrack went on to sell millions of copies and win a Grammy, becoming almost as culturally significant as the film itself. Muse's supermassive black hole plays during the baseball scene and has become permanently associated with the franchise. The song's driving beat and intensity matches the superhuman athleticism on display. The choice to use existing rock music rather than orchestral score for this sequence gives it contemporary energy that contrasts with the film's generally timeless feel. Paramore's Decode, written specifically for the film, captures Bella's perspective on her relationship with Edward. The lyrics about how you can't decode someone who doesn't want to be decoded, about the danger and attraction, mirror the film's themes perfectly. Hayley Williams' powerful vocals give voice to Bella's internal conflict in ways the film itself sometimes struggles to express. Linkin Park's Leave Out All the Rest plays during the credits and thematically resonates with Edward's fear of damning Bella by turning her into a vampire. The lyrics about wanting to be remembered at your best, about leaving out the mistakes, connect to Edward's self-loathing and his desire to protect Bella from his world. Iron and Wine's Flightless Bird American Mouth plays during the prom scene and became so associated with the franchise that it's now almost impossible to hear without thinking of Twilight. The gentle, melancholy tone fits the bittersweet quality of the ending. Bella and Edward together, but with fundamental disagreements about their future unresolved. The use of music to establish scene and mood is particularly effective in sequences without dialogue. The montage of Bella and Edward growing closer, set to various indie tracks, communicates the development of their relationship through visuals and music rather than conversation. These sequences allow the audience to feel the passage of time and the deepening connection without expositional dialogue. The diegetic music Music that exists within the world of the film rather than just on the soundtrack is also carefully chosen. The music playing at the diner, in Bella's truck, at school dances, these are details that ground the film in a specific cultural moment while also revealing character through musical taste. Twilight's release in November 2008 exceeded all box office expectations. Opening weekend brought in $69.6 million domestically, eventually grossing $393.6 million worldwide on a production budget of just $37 million. These numbers made it one of the most profitable films of 2008 and immediately greenlit the production of the sequels. The financial success was driven primarily by teenage girls and young women, a demographic Hollywood had historically undervalued. The film proved that stories centered on female desire and fantasy could be massively profitable, leading to a wave of young adult adaptations trying to recapture Twilight's magic. The Hunger Games, Divergent, The Mortal Instruments, Beautiful Creatures. All of these franchises were greenlit in Twilight's wake. Critical reception, however, was significantly less enthusiastic. The film holds a 49% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with critics praising the chemistry between Stewart and Pattinson while criticizing the plot, dialogue, and problematic relationship dynamics. Many reviews acknowledged the film's appeal to its target demographic while questioning whether that appeal was based on healthy messages. Roger Ebert gave it 2 out of 4 stars, noting that it's about characters who are not especially interesting, but acknowledging that teenage girls will treasure it. His review captured the divide between critics and audiences. He could see why it worked for its intended viewers, without finding it personally compelling. The New York Times review called it entertaining enough, though it might have been more so if Ms. Hardwick had found a better way to navigate the book's peculiar mix of the banal and the overwrought. This criticism of tonal inconsistency was common. Critics struggled with the film's seriousness about what they perceived as silly material. Many reviews were dismissive in ways that felt gendered, mocking the film for being romantic and aimed at teenage girls as if that automatically made it lesser. This criticism wasn't entirely fair. While Twilight has legitimate problems, some of the vitriol seemed rooted in disdain for its female audience rather than actual issues with the film itself. Comparable films aimed at young men rarely received the same level of contempt. Audience reception was intensely passionate. Fans saw the film multiple times in theaters, creating a robust community online to discuss, analyze, and celebrate it. Twilight fandom became a cultural force, with fan fiction proliferating across the internet, fan art flooding social media, and fan theories about future installments generating massive engagement. The divide between Team Edward and Team Jacob became a cultural touchstone, with people who hadn't even seen the films aware of the debate. This kind of engaged, participatory fandom was precisely what made the franchise so valuable. Fans weren't just passively consuming the films, they were actively engaging with them, creating content, and recruiting new viewers. The mockery of Twilight became almost as significant as its sincere fandom. The "still a better love story than Twilight" meme spread across the internet. The sparkling vampires became a running joke, and various elements of the film were held up as examples of bad filmmaking and problematic romance. This backlash was often disproportionate to the film's actual flaws, suggesting cultural anxieties about female desire and teenage girl culture. Some critics and cultural commentators raised legitimate concerns about the relationship dynamics portrayed in the film. Edward's controlling behavior, disabling Bella's truck, making decisions for her, watching her sleep without consent, would be red flags in a real relationship. The film's presentation of these actions as romantic rather than creepy worried people who saw young viewers internalizing these messages about what love should look like. Bella's character arc, or lack thereof, also drew criticism. She becomes increasingly isolated from human friends and activities as she focuses on Edward, her entire identity wrapping around this relationship. When Edward leaves in New Moon, she completely falls apart, becoming non-functional for months. Critics argued this modeled codependency rather than healthy love, potentially influencing young viewers' understanding of relationships. The abstinence metaphor running through the series, with Edward and Bella's physical relationship constrained by the danger he poses to her, was read by some as purity culture dressed up as vampire mythology. The eventual marriage before sex trajectory of the series reinforced this reading, with Stephenie Meyer's Mormon faith clearly influencing the narrative's sexual politics. However, defenders of the film argued that it was providing fantasy fulfillment for an underserved audience. Young women and girls who felt invisible in their real lives could see themselves in Bella and imagine being the center of someone's world. The intensity of Edward's devotion, the idea of being special enough to captivate a powerful being, spoke to real emotional needs, even if the execution was flawed. The film's impact on popular culture extended far beyond just the box office. It influenced fashion, with pale skin becoming trendy, Bella's jacket, and similar items selling in stores, and the Pacific Northwest grunge aesthetic gaining renewed popularity. It affected tourism in Forks, Washington, transforming a small logging town into a destination for fans from around the world who wanted to visit the real locations. The franchise launched careers and created opportunities. Kristen Stewart, Robert Pattinson, and Taylor Lautner became household names and international celebrities. The intense scrutiny and tabloid attention that followed, particularly regarding Stewart and Pattinson's real-life relationship, was both a blessing and a curse for the young actors. For Stewart and Pattinson particularly, Twilight became something they had to actively work to escape. Both have been vocal about their complicated relationships with the franchise, grateful for the opportunities it provided, while also frustrated by being defined by these roles. Their subsequent career choices, deliberately choosing indie films and auteur directors, can be seen as attempts to prove their range beyond Edward and Bella. The film's influence on publishing was immense. Young adult fiction, particularly paranormal romance, exploded in popularity. Publishers actively sought the next Twilight, leading to both opportunities for new voices and a glut of derivative vampire romances. The success demonstrated that books aimed at teenage girls could drive major cultural moments and film franchises. The streaming availability of Twilight years after its release introduced the franchise to new generations. Younger viewers discovering it on Netflix or other platforms often approach it with ironic appreciation, watching it as a comedy and creating TikToks and memes about the most dramatic moments. This second life as a camp classic has enhanced the franchise's longevity, The current cultural conversation around Twilight is more nuanced than the initial polarized response. Many people who loved it as teenagers have revisited it as adults, recognizing problematic elements they couldn't see before while still having affection for what the story meant to them at that time. This evolution in how fans engage with media they loved is healthy. You can appreciate what something gave you while also acknowledging its flaws. Beneath the surface romance and vampire mythology, Twilight explores several themes with varying degrees of success. The most obvious is the forbidden love narrative, Romeo and Juliet updated with supernatural elements. Edward and Bella's relationship is opposed by circumstance rather than feuding families, but the structure is similar. They come from different worlds, their love is dangerous and potentially fatal, but they choose each other anyway. The theme of desire versus restraint runs throughout the film. Edward wants Bella's blood more than anything, but he restrains himself because he values her life more than his desire. This creates constant tension in their relationship. Every touch, every moment alone together carries the potential for loss of control. The film presents this restraint as noble and romantic, the ultimate expression of love. However, this theme can also be read as a metaphor for abstinence and purity culture. Edward's inability to consummate the relationship without potentially killing Bella is a pretty on-the-nose parallel to religious teachings about sex before marriage. The danger of physical intimacy, the need for restraint, the eventual marriage before sex trajectory, all of this reflects Stephen E. Meyer's Mormon faith and its influence on the narrative. The idea of transformation and becoming is central to Bella's arc. She's dissatisfied with her human life, feeling ordinary and unspecial. The vampire world offers escape, transformation into something more than she is. Her desire to become a vampire isn't just about being with Edward forever. It's about becoming extraordinary herself. This resonates with teenage feelings of wanting to be special, to matter, to be more than you are. The found family theme appears in the Cullen family structure. They're not related by blood, but by choice, functioning as a family unit because they want to, not because they have to. Carlyle created this family by turning individuals he wanted to save, and they stay together out of love and shared values. For viewers from complicated family situations, this model of chosen family offers hope and validation. The film also explores the price of secrets and double lives. Bella must lie to Charlie, hide her relationship's true nature from her friends, maintain a facade of normalcy while living an extraordinary reality. This double existence comes with costs: isolation, dishonesty, the loss of normal teenage experiences. The film doesn't fully reckon with these costs, presenting them as necessary rather than examining whether they're worth it. Identity and performance appear in how the Cullens integrate into human society. They're constantly performing normalcy, pretending to be ordinary teenagers in a normal family while hiding their true nature. There's something queer-coded about this performance of the acceptable self while hiding a fundamental truth. Though the film doesn't explore this angle explicitly, the nature versus choice theme emerges in the Cullens' vegetarianism. They're vampires who choose to resist their nature, living ethically despite their predatory instincts. This suggests that identity isn't fixed by nature. You can choose who you want to be regardless of what you are. It's an optimistic message about the power of choice over determinism. The film touches on mortality and the value of human life. Edward's refusal to turn Bella stems from his belief that humanity is precious and vampirism is a form of damnation. He's lived for over a century and sees human life's brevity as what gives it meaning. Bella, young and convinced their love is eternal, doesn't value her humanity the way Edward does. Class differences appear subtly in the contrast between Bella's modest existence and the Cullens' obvious wealth. They live in an architectural showpiece, dress in expensive clothes, drive luxury cars. Their immortality has allowed them to accumulate significant wealth. Bella's old truck, her working-class father, her part-time job in Port Angeles, these mark her as economically different from Edward's family. The film also deals with protection versus control, though it doesn't always distinguish between them clearly. Edward's protective behaviors, watching Bella sleep, following her, disabling her truck, cross lines into controlling territory. The film presents these as evidence of how much he loves her rather than as problems, which is concerning from a healthy relationship perspective. The concept of soulmates and destiny appears in how Edward and Bella describe their connection. They're convinced they're meant to be together, that their love is fated and eternal. This romantic determinism removes agency. They're not choosing each other so much as fulfilling destiny. While this is romantic in a fantasy context, it's problematic as a model for real relationships. The film explores different types of love through various relationships. Edward and Bella's passionate, obsessive romance contrasts with Carlyle and Esme's gentle partnership, Rosalie and Emmett's physical connection, Alice and Jasper's complementary bond. The different couples show that love takes various forms, though the film clearly privileges Edward and Bella's intensity. Sacrifice appears repeatedly as a demonstration of love. Bella sacrifices her mother's company, her life in Phoenix, her human experiences. Edward sacrifices his desire for Bella's blood, his peace of mind, his family's safety. Both characters frame these sacrifices as proving the depth of their love, though the imbalance in what they're each giving up is notable. The film touches on immortality's appeal and cost. The Cullens have eternal youth, superhuman abilities, centuries to pursue knowledge and experiences. But they've also lost their humanity, their ability to have children, their capacity for normalcy. The film presents vampirism as both gift and curse, though it seems more appealing than horrifying. So, where does all of this leave us with Twilight? More than 15 years after its release, the film remains a fascinating cultural artifact that reveals as much about our attitudes toward female desire and teenage girl culture as it does about vampires. The film's strengths lie in its committed performances, particularly the chemistry between Stewart and Pattinson, its atmospheric visual style, and its understanding of its audience's desires. Catherine Hardwicke brought a female perspective and indie sensibility that gave the film texture and intensity beyond what a more commercial director might have achieved. The world building, while sometimes clunky, created a mythology distinct enough to set Twilight apart from other vampire stories. The weaknesses are equally clear. The problematic relationship dynamics, the sometimes laughable dialogue, the inconsistent special effects, and the pacing issues that make the middle section drag. Bella's passivity and the way her entire identity becomes wrapped up in Edward are concerning from a feminist perspective. The film's treatment of the Quileute tribe is superficial and occasionally appropriative. But dismissing Twilight entirely means missing something important about why it resonated so powerfully with millions of viewers. The fantasy it offers of being special, chosen, the center of someone's universe, speaks to real emotional needs, particularly for young women who often feel invisible or undervalued. The intensity of first love, that all-consuming passion that makes everything else fade, is something most people remember even if they recognize it's not sustainable or healthy long-term. The film also deserves credit for proving that stories centered on female desire could be massively profitable, opening doors for more female-focused narratives in Hollywood. It launched careers, influenced fashion and publishing, and created a fandom that remains active today. The cultural conversation it sparked about healthy relationships, female agency, and the media we consume has value even when that conversation is critical. For viewers approaching Twilight now, context matters. This is a 2008 film based on a 2005 book, and both cultural attitudes toward relationships and filmmaking technology have evolved since then. What seemed romantic then might read as controlling now. Special effects that were acceptable for a modest budget look primitive by current standards. But the film remains worth watching, either as sincere romance or ironic comedy, simply because of its cultural significance. The franchise that Twilight launched would go on to gross over $3.3 billion worldwide across 5 films, making it one of the most successful franchises in cinema history. The subsequent films each brought different directors with different visions, but this first installment established the template and the appeal that would sustain the series through its conclusion. Twilight's legacy is complicated. It opened doors while also potentially setting problematic relationship dynamics as romantic ideals. It proved female audiences could drive massive box office while also becoming a punchline for female taste. It launched careers while also potentially typecasting its stars. It created a devoted fandom while also inspiring intense backlash. Ultimately, Twilight is a flawed film that tapped into something powerful for its audience. Whether you love it, hate it, or fall somewhere in the complex middle ground, there's no denying its impact on popular culture, the film industry, and young adult fiction. The conversations it sparked about desire, agency, healthy relationships, and the media we consume continue to be relevant. For those who loved it as teenagers, it represents a specific moment in their lives, tied up with memories of first loves, friendship, and coming of age. The ability to revisit it now with more critical eyes while still appreciating what it meant then shows growth and nuance. You can acknowledge something's flaws while still valuing its place in your personal history. For new viewers discovering it now, approach it with an open mind. Don't expect high art or perfect filmmaking. Expect a melodramatic, supernatural romance that takes itself very seriously, with all the strengths and weaknesses that entails. You might find yourself swept up in the romance. You might spend the whole time laughing at the ridiculousness, or you might experience both reactions simultaneously. The film works best if you can tap into the mindset of its target audience, that teenage yearning for all-consuming love, for being special enough to captivate someone powerful, for escape from the mundane, into something magical. If you can access that part of yourself or remember what it felt like to feel that way, Twilight might surprise you with its emotional resonance. What's clear is that Twilight will continue to be discussed, analyzed, memed, and rewatched for years to come. Its influence on young adult fiction, film franchises, and popular culture is undeniable. Whether that influence is ultimately positive or negative remains debated, but the conversation itself has value. The film asks us to think about what we want from romance, what messages we send to young viewers about healthy relationships, how we value media created for female audiences, and what role fantasy plays in our emotional lives. These are important questions worth grappling with, even when the answers are complicated. So yes, watch Twilight. Watch it sincerely or ironically, alone or with friends making commentary, as a guilty pleasure or an academic text. Form your own opinions about what it does well and where it stumbles. Engage with a cultural phenomenon that shaped a generation's understanding of romance and supernatural fiction. Just remember that it's okay to enjoy problematic media while also acknowledging its problems. You can appreciate the chemistry between the leads while critiquing the controlling relationship dynamics. You can love the atmospheric visual style while mocking the sparkling vampire. You can value what the story meant to you while recognizing it shouldn't be a template for real relationships. Twilight is many things: a romance, a thriller, a fantasy, a cultural phenomenon, a problematic text, a guilty pleasure, a camp classic. What it means to you will depend on your perspective, your age when you first encountered it, and your willingness to engage with it on its own terms. Whatever your reaction, you'll be part of a conversation that's been going on for over 15 years and shows no signs of stopping. And really, isn't that lasting cultural impact, the ability to inspire passionate reactions, both positive and negative, more than a decade later, a kind of success in itself? Twilight may not be a perfect film, or even a particularly good one by conventional critical standards, but it's undeniably a significant one. And sometimes, significance matters more than perfection. The ability to inspire passionate reactions, both positive and negative, more than a decade later, a kind of success in itself? Twilight may not be a perfect film, or even a particularly good one by conventional critical standards, but it's undeniably a significant one. And sometimes, significance matters more than perfection. Now, thinking about Twilight in the broader context of vampire cinema, it's wild how much this film diverged from everything that came before it. I mean, you had decades of vampire movies, from Bela Lugosi's Dracula to Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire, from Blade to 30 Days of Night. And they all portrayed vampires as these terrifying, monstrous creatures of the night. Then Twilight comes along and says, "What if vampires went to high school and played baseball?" It's such a radical departure that you can understand why traditional horror fans were absolutely furious about it. But here's the thing, that reimagining is exactly what made Twilight feel fresh to its target audience. These weren't your grandfather's vampires lurking in Gothic castles and preying on innocent villagers. These were vampires with family dynamics, moral codes, and the ability to integrate into modern society. The Cullens aren't hiding in the shadows waiting to strike. They're living openly, albeit with a carefully maintained cover story. That shift from pure horror to romantic fantasy opened up storytelling possibilities that the traditional vampire mythology just couldn't support. The decision to make vampires sparkle in sunlight instead of burning up is probably the single most controversial choice in the entire film, and I get why it bothers people. It's so far removed from established lore that it feels like a betrayal of the vampire genre itself. But from a storytelling perspective, it solves a massive problem. How do you have a vampire boyfriend who can actually spend time with his human girlfriend during daylight hours? The traditional mythology would have confined Edward and Bella's relationship to exclusively nighttime encounters, which severely limits what you can do narratively. The sparkling is also thematically significant, even if it looks ridiculous. It's meant to show that Edward is beautiful and otherworldly, that his true nature is something wondrous rather than purely monstrous. It transforms the revelation scene from horror to fantasy, from "I'm a monster who will kill you" to "I'm something magical and different." Whether that works for you depends entirely on whether you're willing to accept vampires as romantic fantasy figures rather than horror villains. What's fascinating is how the film handles the tension between these two interpretations of vampirism. Edward constantly tells Bella he's dangerous, that he's a killer, that she should be afraid of him. The script wants to have it both ways, acknowledging the horror roots of vampire mythology while also presenting Edward as a romantic hero. Sometimes this works, creating genuine tension about whether Edward will lose control. Other times, it feels contradictory, like the film can't decide if Edward is dangerous or just thinks he is. The Cullens' vegetarian lifestyle is the film's way of making vampires sympathetic enough to be heroes. By choosing to drink animal blood instead of human blood, they're exercising moral choice in a way that traditional vampires don't. They're not just predators following their nature, they're individuals making ethical decisions despite their instincts. This transforms vampirism from a curse into more of a chronic condition that can be managed with willpower and support. Carlyle's backstory is crucial here because he's the one who figured out that vampires don't have to kill humans. He spent centuries hating what he was, trying to destroy himself, before discovering he could satisfy his thirst with animal blood instead. That discovery allowed him to reclaim his humanity, in a metaphorical sense, and live according to his values rather than his nature. He then built a family of vampires who share those values, creating a support system that makes their lifestyle sustainable. But the film also shows us, through James, Victoria, and Laurent, that the Cullens are the exception rather than the rule. Most vampires in this world don't see any problem with hunting humans. It's just what they do, part of the natural order. James in particular seems to view the Cullens' lifestyle with a mixture of amusement and contempt, like they're denying themselves for no good reason. This contrast emphasizes that the Cullens are choosing difficulty over ease, restraint over indulgence, purely because they believe it's right. The world building around vampire abilities is actually pretty well thought out, even if the execution is sometimes shaky. Each vampire has their baseline supernatural traits: strength, speed, enhanced senses, immortality, venom that can turn humans. But some also develop additional powers based on abilities they had as humans. Edward's telepathy, Alice's precognition, Jasper's emotional manipulation. These aren't random. They're amplifications of their human traits. It's a nice touch that makes each vampire feel distinct and gives them narrative utility beyond just being strong and fast. The Volturi, who we only hear about in this film but don't actually see, are set up as the vampire world's governing body. They enforce the rules that keep vampires secret from humans, and apparently they're powerful and terrifying enough that even the Cullens, who are pretty formidable themselves, are genuinely afraid of them. This establishes stakes beyond the immediate plot. There are consequences to the vampire world being exposed, and the Cullens' decision to bring Bella into their world creates real risks. The treaty between the Cullens and the Quileute tribe is another clever piece of world-building that pays off in later films. There's a history here, generations of coexistence based on mutual agreement. The vampires stay off Quileute land. The tribe keeps the vampire secret. It creates this larger supernatural ecosystem where different groups have their own territories and rules. Jacob's casual mention of it while telling the legends doesn't seem particularly significant in the moment, but it's laying groundwork for conflicts that will explode in the sequels. The film's treatment of Bella's human friends is interesting because you can literally watch them becoming less important to her as the story progresses. In early scenes, she's making genuine efforts to connect with Jessica, Angela, and the others. She goes dress shopping with them. She sits with them at lunch. She engages with the social world of the school. But once Edward enters her life fully, those friendships start fading. She cancels plans. She stops confiding in them. She's physically present, but mentally elsewhere. It's a realistic portrayal of how all-consuming first love can be, but it's also kind of sad to watch her isolate herself. Mike Newton's crush on Bella and his obvious jealousy of Edward provide some comic relief, but it also serves a narrative purpose. He represents the normal teenage life Bella could have. Uncomplicated, age-appropriate, safe. His awkward attempts to ask her out, his confusion about why she'd choose Edward over him, reminds us that Bella is actively choosing danger and complication over the easier path. Tyler's similar interest in Bella reinforces this. She's got options for normal teenage romance, but she's fixated on the one guy who could literally kill her accidentally. Angela is probably Bella's most genuine friend, the one person who doesn't seem to want anything from her except actual friendship. Their shopping trip scenes show a potential friendship that could have developed if Bella hadn't become so consumed by Edward. Angela's sweet, supportive, and perceptive without being pushed. She's the kind of friend Bella actually needs, someone who could ground her and provide perspective, but Bella increasingly shuts her out as she gets deeper into the vampire world. Jessica is more superficial, but in a very realistic way for a teenage girl. She's interested in boys, clothes, social dynamics, typical high school stuff. Her narration during the dress shopping scene, gossiping about everyone at school, is both annoying and completely authentic to how teenage girls actually talk. She's not a deep thinker, and she's definitely self-centered, but she's not malicious. Her friendship with Bella is shallow, sure, but it's also uncomplicated and normal in ways that Bella's relationship with Edward absolutely isn't. The film does this thing where it gradually drains the color and energy from scenes that don't involve Edward. Bella's human life becomes increasingly gray and dull, while scenes with Edward have more visual interest and emotional intensity. It's a clever way of showing how Bella's perceiving her world, Everything that isn't Edward has become background noise. But it also makes the middle section of the film feel somewhat repetitive because we're essentially watching the same dynamic play out over and over. Bella wants to be closer to Edward. Edward warns her away while also being unable to stay away himself. The parent-child relationships in the film are surprisingly well developed, considering how much focus is on the central romance. Charlie and Bella's awkward cohabitation feels very real. They love each other, but don't really know each other after years of living apart. Charlie tries to give Bella space while also trying to be a present father, and he mostly fails at both because he doesn't know how to talk to his teenage daughter. The scenes of them eating dinner in silence, both wanting to connect but not knowing how, are genuinely poignant. Renee exists mostly through phone calls and Bella's memories, but she's still a significant presence. The reversal of the normal parent-child dynamic, Bella taking care of her flighty mother rather than the other way around, explains a lot about Bella's character. She's used to being the responsible one, the caretaker, the person who sacrifices her own wants for someone else's needs. That pattern continues with Charlie and then gets inverted with Edward, who insists on taking care of her instead. For maybe the first time in her life, Bella is the one being protected rather than doing the protecting, and that's intoxicating for her. The Cullen parent-child dynamics are fascinating because these aren't actually parent-child relationships in the traditional sense. Carlisle turned most of them when they were already adults or nearly so, and they've all been alive for decades or centuries. Yet they've chosen to organize themselves as a family, with Carlisle and Esme as parental figures and the others as siblings. It's a deliberately constructed family unit that serves both practical purposes. It's easier to integrate into human society as a family and emotional ones. They've created the stability and connection of family by choice rather than by blood. Rosalie and Emmett's relationship, barely sketched in this film but clearly present, shows a different model of vampire romance than Edward and Bella's tortured love. They're passionate and physical in ways that Edward and Bella can't be, secure in their relationship rather than constantly questioning it. Rosalie's hostility toward Bella partly stems from jealousy that Bella would choose to give up humanity, but it might also come from protectiveness of her family. Bella represents danger. Her presence could expose them, could bring the Volturi down on them, could destroy the life they've carefully built. Alice and Jasper are the other established couple, and they're interesting because their relationship seems to be based on complementarity. Alice's visions of the future and Jasper's ability to manipulate emotions make them a powerful team. There's a gentleness to their interactions that contrasts with Rosalie and Emmett's passion and Edward and Bella's intensity. They seem comfortable together, settled in a way that suggests they've worked through whatever initial complications their relationship might have had. The film's pacing really is its biggest structural problem. The first act moves briskly. Bella arrives, meets Edward, gets increasingly suspicious about him. The second act, where they're developing their relationship and she's being integrated into his world, drags significantly because we're essentially watching variations on the same scene. They talk about how dangerous their love is. They almost kiss. Edward pulls away. Repeat. It's emotionally intense, but narratively static, and you can feel the film marking time until James shows up to create actual external conflict. That said, the relationship development section does serve an important purpose. It establishes the depth of Edward and Bella's connection, so that the stakes in the third act feel real. If we hadn't spent all that time watching them fall deeper in love, Edward's desperation to save her and Bella's willingness to sacrifice herself wouldn't hit as hard. The problem is just that the film doesn't find enough variation in how it presents those relationship beats, so they start feeling repetitive. The James Hunt sequence is where the film suddenly remembers it's supposed to be a thriller and kicks into higher gear. The strategy meetings, the split-up plan, the tracking and counter-tracking, this is all pretty standard action thriller stuff, but it's executed well enough to be engaging. The film effectively conveys the danger James represents and the desperation of the Cullens' efforts to protect Bella, while also trying to eliminate the threat he poses. James's decision to lure Bella out by faking her mother's kidnapping is genuinely clever villainy. He studied Bella enough to know exactly what bait will make her abandon the safety of her protectors, and he's patient enough to set up the trap carefully. The fake video footage showing Renee in danger is cruel psychological manipulation exploiting Bella's protective instincts toward her mother. It's the kind of calculated evil that makes James feel like a real threat rather than just a monster. Bella's choice to face James alone is both incredibly brave and incredibly stupid, which is very on brand for her character. She's willing to sacrifice herself to protect both her mother and the Cullens, which is noble. But she also doesn't stop to consider that James might be lying, that she's playing right into his hands, that her death will destroy Edward. It's selfless and selfish simultaneously. She's trying to protect people she loves, but she's also making decisions for them without their input, assuming her sacrifice is what's needed without actually verifying the situation. The ballet studio setting for the climax is one of the film's better symbolic choices. This is where Bella took dance lessons as a child, a place of innocent childhood memories. James corrupts that innocence, turning it into a site of violence and trauma. The juxtaposition of the graceful, artistic purpose of the space with the brutal fight that occurs there creates effective contrast. The mirrors everywhere add to the visual interest while also making the space feel fragmented and disorienting. James's taunting of Bella while he's hunting her in the studio is genuinely frightening. He's not in a hurry. He's enjoying himself, playing with his food. The way he talks about tracking her mother, about how easy it was to manipulate Bella, about how he's going to make Edward watch her die. It's cruel for cruelty's sake, the behavior of someone who's done this many times before and refined his technique. Cam Gigandet plays it with this casual sadism that makes your skin crawl. The fight when the Cullens arrive is brutal and chaotic, shot with enough quick cuts and close-ups that you're not entirely sure what's happening moment to moment, but you get the sense of desperate violence. Edward's viciousness in destroying James shows a side of him we haven't seen before. He's not the controlled, restrained Edward, carefully managing his vampire nature. He's a predator destroying a threat to his mate. It's both satisfying as action and revealing as character development. The moment where Edward has to suck the venom out of Bella's wound is the film's most literal manifestation of its central metaphor. He has to taste what he's wanted most throughout the entire film, her blood, but stop himself from taking too much. It's the ultimate test of his control and his love. The way it's shot, with extreme close-ups of his face as he struggles against his nature, makes the internal battle visible. When Carlyle tells him, "Edward, stop, her blood is clean," and Edward pulls away, it's not just that he's saved her life. He's proven that his love is stronger than his thirst. The hospital sequence afterward is quieter and more emotionally grounded, giving space for the characters to process what just happened. Bella's injuries are serious enough to be believable, but not so severe that she's permanently damaged, which is the film threading a needle. She nearly died. There are real consequences, but she'll recover fully. Edward's guilt and anguish are palpable. He blames himself for putting her in danger, which sets up his decision to leave her in New Moon. Charlie and Renee's presence in the hospital grounds things back in human reality. They have no idea what actually happened. They believe the cover story about Bella falling downstairs, and they're just relieved she's okay. The lying to them, the maintaining of the secret, is necessary, but also creates distance between Bella and her parents. She's living a double life now, and that gap between her real experiences and what she can tell her family will only widen. The prom sequence that closes the film is pure wish fulfillment, giving the audience the romantic payoff they've been waiting for after 2 hours of tension and danger. Edward in a tux, Bella in a cast being twirled around a gazebo while romantic music plays, it's deeply cheesy and also kind of perfect for what it is. The film knows its audience wants this moment, and it delivers it without irony or apology. But the scene also contains the seeds of future conflict. Bella brings up wanting to be turned into a vampire, making it clear this isn't a passing fancy. She's serious about wanting to join Edward's world permanently. Edward's refusal, his insistence that she should remain human and have a normal life, is well-intentioned but paternalistic. He's making a huge decision about her future without really considering what she wants. It's protective, sure, but it's also controlling, and it establishes that they fundamentally disagree about something really important. Victoria watching from the woods is a great final image because it reminds us that while Edward and Bella got their happy ending for now, there are consequences still to come. James is dead, but Victoria loved him, and she's going to want revenge. The threat isn't over. If anything, it's just beginning. It's an effective way to create anticipation for the sequel while also adding a slight shadow to the romantic ending. Looking at the film's legacy now, it's impossible to separate Twilight from the cultural moment it created and the conversations it sparked. The film's success changed Hollywood's approach to young adult adaptations, proved that female audiences could drive massive box office, and launched careers that are still thriving today. It also sparked legitimate debates about healthy relationships, female agency, and what messages we send through the stories we tell. The film works best as a cultural artifact and a snapshot of a particular moment in pop culture. It captured something real about teenage desire and the fantasy of being special, even if the execution was flawed. The intensity of the fandom it inspired, both sincere and ironic, speaks to its ability to create strong emotional reactions. That's worth something, even when those reactions are negative. For all its problems, and there are many, Twilight remains endlessly watchable and discussable. Whether you're analyzing it seriously or mocking it affectionately, engaging with it critically or just enjoying the romance, there's something there to grab onto. It's messy, problematic, melodramatic, and absolutely sincere in ways that mainstream filmmaking often isn't anymore. And absolutely sincere in ways that mainstream filmmaking often isn't anymore.